Hey, it's the blog ride, and we're on the way home. I don't have any, big things that I wanted to talk about this week, so that's why I've been kind of lax on getting stuff up. Everything's been little stuff. I'm working on the script for the Harry Potter essay, and I've been playing around with how I want to do it, how I want to present it. So I think I know how I want to do it. It's now going to be making sure I've got what I need to do a good enough job with it. So making sure I've got something good I can record with, or at least good enough. All that fun stuff. I got to figure out what I want to do visual-wise with it. Sometime here in the near future, I'm going to be talking again about Fallout 76. I think it was the last blog I did. I talked about video games, and I talked about what video games do as far as creativity, and how playing a game can be very much like reading a book in how you engage with it. So I'm going to be talking about Fallout 76. I'm going to have a guest. I just don't know yet how we're going to record, and I'm not exactly sure when we're going to record yet, but that'll be fun. Looking forward to it. And what else? I did want to talk a little bit, see, that's the thing, there were little things I wanted to talk about, but nothing quite, no one thing is quite, take up your drive kind of discussion. I had talked about a little bit about how I've touched on this before, but I wanted to revisit empathy and sympathy. I'm going to be talking about this at length in the video essay, but I did kind of want to preempt it a little bit. There's a difference between empathy and sympathy. We tend to use them interchangeably. I do. And it's just a force of habit. And empathy is your ability to actually put yourself into someone's shoes, to feel how they are feeling about a situation, based on your own experience. That can be direct experience. Somebody loses a loved one, you've also lost a loved one, so you're empathizing with them in their grief or whatever other feelings that they're having. It can also be situations that you can map onto in some way in order to understand their feelings. An example would be actually, what would be a really good example that I'm not going to be discussing directly in the video essay? My brain is completely dead now. Well, I guess if we want to go with, losing a loved one, somebody's lost a parent. You haven't gone through the loss of a parent, but you have gone through the loss of a close friend, something like that, where, you think about your loss, or your conflicted emotions, or whatever might be going on, to help you understand theirs, and support them at that time. So, those would be examples of empathy. It's where you're actually putting yourself into their shoes, whether it's from a direct experience that you've had with the same thing that they're dealing with, or being able to draw upon other experiences in order to understand the emotion and situation that they're in. Sympathy is where you are feeling emotion with them. And it's not so much that you're mapping your own experiences and understanding and putting yourself in their shoes. It's that you are seeing the emotion that they are feeling, and you are feeling that emotion with them. It's kind of hard, and I think this is why the two words end up being used interchangeably so much. It's very nuanced when it comes to our interactions with people, the difference between the two. So the best way I know to explain it is actually referring back to books or movies, movies especially, because movies are really good at invoking sympathetic emotion. When you're watching a movie and, Old Yeller dies and has to be put down, spoiler, I guess. You haven't seen Old Yeller? I haven't seen Old Yeller, and I know how the thing ends. But, the dog has to be put down, and everybody's crying, and you start crying because it is so sad. That's sympathetic emotion. You're not necessarily hearkening back to your own experience of a pet dying. You are reacting to the emotions that are up there on the screen, in the situation that's up there on the screen. The same thing happens when, you're watching a movie where a character is getting into an argument with another character, and they're really mad at them and upset with them, and you're feeling that mad and upset with them. Again, you're not mapping your own experience onto it. There is a character that you have a bond to, and you are feeling that emotion with them. That's how sympathy works. Sympathy works when we have a bond to someone that allows us to feel emotion with them. They are sad, therefore we are sad. They are happy, therefore we are happy, etc., etc. Like I said, there's some nuance because often we do both at the same time. Which is possible, and we kind of go back and forth between what we're actually doing with these companion emotions or companion actions. One of the things that's interesting is that, we do, when we try to offer like a response to somebody's grief, for example, and actually we won't go with grief. We'll go with a really good example of where sympathy can go wrong. Many years ago, I had just made friends with this guy, and we're hanging out. He's married, and his wife's interesting. We'll just go with that. And we're hanging out, and he looks at me and he goes, "Yeah, so me and so are getting divorced." And I go, "Oh, I'm sorry," because my instinct is, "Oh, okay, your marriage is dissolving. That's not a good thing. So I'm going to be sympathetically sad with you." And he looks at me and goes, "I'm not." And I'm like, oh, I had no idea how to react there. Because that's like the first time as an adult I had dealt with divorce. I had like a few friends at that point that were married. I myself had not been in any really serious relationships. Well, I mean, not any that actually progressed far enough for serious considerations of marriage and things like that. We'll say that. So, but as an adult, it was the first time I dealt with somebody around me going through a divorce. So, I had no idea how to react, because the only way I had ever experienced divorce before was as a kid, and my parents either splitting up or divorcing. So, yeah, that was sympathy gone bad. Showing sympathy effectively without it being misplaced or even negatively received. Like, my friend was fine. He understood, where I was coming from and trying to offer, and offering the sympathy that I did. But there are times that when we try to offer sympathy and it comes across condescending or improper. Sympathy really does require already knowing what a person's actual emotional reaction is, and knowing whether or not they need us to actually feel that with them, or if they need us to feel something else. Empathy does not, one of the things with empathy is that empathy does not require us to be feeling that emotion with somebody. It only requires us to understand it. So I can use empathy to understand somebody's feelings, and then I can switch over to sympathy and feel that emotion with them. At the same time, I can use empathy to understand somebody's emotion, and then instead of being sympathetic in that emotion with them, I can then display something else complementary to it. And I think that decision process when it comes to empathy, and then how to react empathetically, I think that's where our lines cross a lot when it comes to talking about empathy and sympathy. So when I'm doing the essay, I'm going to try to keep, the correct usage of these terms. I'm going to do my best to use empathy when I need to be using empathy, as far as discussing the term and what we're doing when we're in the essay, and then and sympathy. Hopefully, in like proofreading my script and stuff like that, I will be able to catch when I slip. But for what I'm wanting to do with the essay, and how I'm wanting to talk about transgender issues and the book as a metaphor, as a coming out story in that regard, having pretty clear the difference between empathy and sympathy, I think, are pretty important. Something else, there's a YouTuber that I follow who was actually talking about, how much they hate coming out narratives, and talking about stories that are not about, somebody who is transgender, or somebody who is homosexual, somebody who is bisexual, but instead, taking these stories not related to them and talking about the metaphor of them. And I understand, because we need to actually see more people who are transgender, who are homosexual, who are bisexual, who are non-binary in stories. There needs to be more stories about these people, about us, because I'm bisexual. There needs to be more stories about us and our experiences when it comes to the LGBT community as a whole. There are not enough of these stories, which is interesting to me, because so many creators of stories historically have been part of the LGBT community. There are directors who are part of the LGBT community, and producers and actors and writers. Writers for years and years who have been LGBT. LGBT artists is not uncommon today or historically. So I think it says a lot about society that we don't see more representation in works. But because there is not as much representation as there really ought to be, I think that's why drawing on these metaphors is important, because while the stories may not be there, the experiences do get mapped on, sometimes purposefully by people who, because of societal reasons, cannot present these stories the way that they would like to, cannot represent themselves in a story, but also because while, even in times that LGBT people are not overtly recognized, they are still present, and those experiences of them and interactions with them are things that, intentionally or not, will find their way into stories. So, and oppression does sometimes map onto other oppression. A story that a person who is a single mother and having to deal with all of the hardships of that and the stigma that comes with it, can write a story where she maps her oppression into that story in some way, whether consciously or unconsciously. And because of how oppression tends to work, somebody else who is oppressed for a different reason can often find similarities of their experience in what they see put into this other character. That's the thing, and I'm pretty sure I discussed that. I think I discussed that. I don't remember. But yeah, it's oppression can map onto other oppression for people who are of one group to see themselves in the oppression of another group. That's not unusual, because that's just how oppression works, unfortunately. Unfortunately for oppression existing, but fortunately, for people who are oppressed in some way, to be able to find commonality with other people who are oppressed, which is important in being able to fight that oppression. So that's why these metaphors are actually important, even when we still need better representation. It's not a matter of picking what you can get and be satisfied with it. That's not what's going on with queer readings of stories that are not themselves necessarily queer, or at least overtly queer. It is recognizing that there are patterns that show up no matter the intention of the creator. So yeah, there you go. So that's talking about the upcoming Harry Potter essay. Touched on that I'm going to be talking about 76 again. I'm going to have a guest when I do it, but I don't know when that'll be. Oh, and then, so the other day I'm listening to Wisecrack, and there is, they were talking about streaming services, and we already have Netflix and Hulu. Now Disney's doing streaming. Apparently CBS is doing streaming. And they're talking about how this just seems to be happening more and more, and that data is one of the incentives for companies, because data is important. Data is what lets you effectively market to people, and data is what lets you do the whole what's the safe thing that we can create that we know people will consume? Well, here's the data on it. But as I'm listening to Jared talk about it, I keep asking this question, why? And I mean, he answers it with the whole data stuff, but my brain kept asking the question. And there's some really interesting ideas about information and memes and language. Some very interesting, I guess, metaphysical theories about these things. But I got to thinking about AI, and we think about artificial intelligence in this very specific way where we're going to make a computer, and then eventually the computer is going to start thinking like a human. And I wondered, what if that's wrong? What if that's not what's going to happen? What if information is alive? Not in any sense that we really understand life. It's not that it has a physical manifestation, but that it is somehow a living thing. That even to the point that, what if the thing that we think of when we think of a soul, and we think of, spiritual connection between people, whether we're thinking about a soul, or we're thinking about God, or we're thinking about spiritual energy in the world, whatever, what if that ness is information? And which, when you think about, what a meme is, then, and how a meme is this bit of information that is designed to be spread virally, that, like when we use memes colloquially, we're talking about those funny pictures, put captions on them, and you submit them to I Can Has Cheeseburger, or you put them up on Facebook, I'm old, or whatever. But the idea of what a meme actually is actually older than that. A meme is a unit of information. And it's a unit of information that catches on and gets spread. And what if that's like a spore, right? That information, in its effort to grow and multiply, puts out there. And, whether it's a parasitic relationship or a symbiotic relationship, I don't know. This is just like this idea in my head. But what if this whole thing of information technology and the way that it's growing, what if information itself is doing that? That the ideas that we get come from information, and that information is using us to evolve. In a similar way that, it would use us to reproduce through memes. But it's using us to evolve until it can reach that level of self-sufficiency. What we think of as AI, for it would be something else. Maybe the same. I don't know. Like I said, it's just weird thoughts in my head, right? But it's like, we think of AI as something that's coming, but what if it's already here? It's just not met its evolved form yet. It's still using us to evolve into the form that it wants to have or needs to have. Just things that hit my head randomly because of stuff I listen to on YouTube. So yeah, I think that about covers all the random thoughts that I've got in my head over the past week. Let's see, we've got the empathy, sympathy thing, we've got 76, we've got the information thing, Oh, am I scared of that idea? No, I'm not scared of that idea at all. I am not one of those people who is scared of developing AI and developing a sentient AI. I'm not one of those people who looks at stuff like Terminator and goes, yep, that's the absolute thing that would have to happen if, we get sentient machines and blah, 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 and everything's going to become the Matrix because we're really good batteries and blah. No, I'm not one of those people. If I was richer, I'd be able to actually follow through on a lot of my futurist tendencies, but technology and watching it develop, while weird sometimes, and I'm getting old enough that every once in a while it confuses me. It doesn't usually confuse me for long, and I love watching technology develop and seeing the things that are beginning to come to fruition. Elon Musk. I think it's Elon Musk that was talking about, the thing to have in your head to let you interact with, like drones and stuff. Like, hells yeah, that's like an important step towards the stuff I want, because I want to be able to upload my brain to a computer. I don't know if I've talked about that on here yet, but like, that's one of my goals. And that's like, right along the path to that. So, yeah, I have talked about, AIs and dystopian fiction before. I really do think that, in Terminator, Skynet going bad is not because Skynet was bad. It's because we were. And I don't mean that in the, we brought on our own destruction kind of way, because no. I mean, like, we literally tried to, we made this machine, and then we said, you're going to be responsible for the violence that we want to perpetuate. That's bad. When we have technology that we develop, it's only bad in so much as we make it bad. And yeah, there is a certain degree of, if you make a weapon, what do you expect a weapon to be used for? So if you don't want that weapon to be used, don't make that weapon. But an AI is not a weapon. It's just an AI. We, in developing technology and improving technology, have the capability of making sure that we use that technology responsibly, and that we interact with that technology responsibly. Right now our computers are something that we use, but they are more and more becoming what we interact with, and we have the capability within ourselves to make that transition, so that when our computers become sentient, we are not treating them like slaves, we are treating them like other sentient beings. But we have to be conscious of that, and we have to make those decisions. And if we're scared all the time, we're not going to do that, because that requires a lot more nuance than what fear allows. So, there you go. So I think that's enough rambling for today. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, comment, share some thoughts. Because I talked about a lot of very random things. So, any of it that's interesting to you that you want to comment on, please comment. Come back, ring the bell when you subscribe so that you'll know when I have another video up.